Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Shuchandra Ghosh, Professor, Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. The theme is Indian culture and the paper relates to economic history of India, and I will be discussing today post-Mauryan economy in the North India. The post-Mauryan period in Indian history stretches from 200 BC to 300 CE, and it witnessed the presence of several powers in north and northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. What we find that in this period the focus of attention moves away from the Ganga valley to the northwestern part, because most of the ruling dynasties in this period came from the northwest. They were powers who were ruling in the Indo-Iranian borderlands, which consisted of Bactria, that is the region to the north of the Hindu Kush, and the region to the south of the Hindu Kush. So, there was a shift in the focus of political power. Our sources for understanding the economy of this period would be rather the numismatic sources, the epigraphy sources, and the field archaeological materials. Now, talking about the economic development in the post-Mauryan period, we will discuss this under the following themes. One is agriculture and irrigation, second is proliferation of crafts, monetization, urbanization, and we will talk a little bit on the port cities, trade, export and import, guilds and revenue earnings. To begin with agriculture, we possess very little information on the land system during the post-Mauryan period in North India. Agriculture was perhaps commonplace because we have a text like Milindu-Paiho, which is not generally a text on agriculture, but it gives you some details on the method of agriculture right from that different stages. It talks about 8 different stages of agricultural operations, removing from weeds from the field to the final harvesting and also winnowing of crops. So, which shows that agriculture was of course very much present. We have also archaeological findings of tools like mostly iron tools like the plowshares, axes, adze, spade and sickle from regions like Taxila, Sachi, and which suggest compatibility with literary image. Another important factor in this period is that not much state initiative in agricultural development is evident. The state initiative is more towards trade. Due to importance to irrigation for the expansion of agricultural production was given at least in the northwestern part of the empire. This was possibly due to the fact that West India witnessed less rainfall, and so necessary measures had to be taken for conservation of water. Scholars have located remains of old canals and traces of fields on hill terraces with devices to channelize rainwater from fields at the top to those at the bottom in the Peshawar region during the Kushana period. I will give you another example of the Kushana period. This is the Rabatak inscription, which also talks about an officer who was related to another place called Surkotal, and there in the Surkotal inscription it talks about scarcity of water, and when there was the scarcity of water, channels were dug, canals were made so that water could be brought in. So, there was this attempt on the part of the ruler to have induced irrigation in these regions which were dry. Moreover, excavations of tanks, that is Tarago, and well, that is Cooper, is very much appreciated in the normative Brahmanical text as well as in the Buddhist texts. We find lots of donations in Kharoshti which happens to Kupas, that is wells and stupas. So, donation in wells or making up taragas were a very important part of the irrigation scenario in this period. Some of these large scale irrigation measures must have been quite expensive and so might have been financed by the ruling authorities rather than private individuals. Kushanas did their best to boost irrigation projects, and we have that the areas where we did not have bountiful supply of rain, the Kushanas made sure that there were supralocal irrigation projects. A remarkable feature of the economic life was proliferation of crafts, which is closely related with expanding trade. Various craftsmen figure in inscriptions as donors to the Buddhist and Jain monasteries. For example, we come across superintending engineers, which are Navakarmikas. That means we have, like, suppose there is inscriptions which talk about donation in a Buddhist monastery, they will say that the repairing work could be done by the Navakarmika. Then we have actors, the Shoilaka. It is particularly in Mathura. In the inscriptions from Mathura, we have lot of representations of the Shoilakas, that is the actors. Carpenters, which are known as Baddhakis, are replete in our inscriptions and also in the Jataka literature. Perfumers, that is Gandhika, and later on we have a category called Gandhabonik. Goldsmiths, that is Shuvarnakara, Pravarika, the cloth makers, Lohakara, ironsmith, jewelers, Manikara. So, different kinds of professions were there in this period, and this shows that there was a continuity from the period earlier to the post-Median period, because in the Buddhist texts also we have references in the 6th century BC to lot of these professions. From the Kushan period, we have excavations in Taxila and lot of artifacts have been found. So, these artifacts relate to pottery, terracotta objects, metal, stone, ivory and bone objects, plaques and sculptural pieces, beads, etc. It betrays the existence of potters, smiths, sculptors, weavers and similar other craft groups in the material milieu of the Kushan period. Thus, it appears that the Kushanas had lot of, in this period, lot of artisanal activities, trade related activities were going on. And since the Kushanas were ruling over a large part of the territory, so there was no problem of movement for traders who were Sartavahas, Vanikas from one place to another. Different kinds of objects have been found from Taxila, from Begram, and from Begram we have very interesting finds on the ivories. So, these were used for manufacturing luxury goods, domestic objects and weapons. And the best specimen actually from of ivory comes from Begram. These craftsmen produced articles of daily necessities and also luxury items. So, from this archaeological materials, we can understand the daily life of the period. Now, moving on from ivory to textiles, we find that this is also another category where we have continuation from the earlier times. It is one of the foremost crafts. Mathura was very famous for textiles and Varanasi, of course. These were the leading textile centers, and it is important to note that crafts production in this period is marked by lessening control of the state and growing private enterprises. So, you have lot of people who are actually trying to make this kind of textiles or other bead productions or other craft activities. But there is one area where the state was very interested, and this is mining, because control of mining gave the state the resources. Therefore, we find that in the post-Mauryan period, particularly regarding the Kushanas, they had control over the region called Akara, which is the Malwa region, and the augmentation of mining was done through state. So, the mining gives the state the resources through which and the revenue earning potential. Epigraphic and literary materials including Geographica Huphigus of Ptolemy may indicate that the Kushanas took initiative to work out diamond mines of eastern Malwa, variously called Dasharna, Akara, Purva Malava and Kosha. A very important factor of economy is monetization. So, if we have commercial prosperity, naturally it would lead to monetization. Interestingly, in the post-Mauryan North India, we have several dynasties who were issuing coins in silver, in gold and also in copper, which suggest petty transactions. So, the powers were the Indo-Greeks, the Scythians, the Parthians, the Kushanas, and also we had local coinages from the Shunga period. Then we had the non-monarchical powers also who were issuing coins in this period, maybe of copper, but the extensive monetization could be perceived in this period when we have long distance trade network and also internal trade network. Provenances of a great number of Kushana coins, including some hoards, may suggest their circulation in parts of India and Central Asia and even beyond the limits of the Kushana dominions. Actually, in Ethiopia, a Kushana coin hoard has been found, which shows that Kushan coins were found in as far as a region like Ethiopia. I mentioned earlier also that the Ganashangos were issuing coins. So, we have the Ganashangos like the Yodhyas, the Malavas, the Arjunayanas, the Kunindas. They were originally located among the 5 Punjab rivers, but then they were moving towards Rajasthan region, some towards the north to the Himalayan foothills, and they were issuing lot of coins where there were interaction with the Indo-Greeks and later on the Kushanas. A significant aspect of coinage was also availability of large number of copper coins, because copper coins are generally used for petty transactions and which indicate an impact of monetization even on the daily life of the common people. So, you cannot buy common articles with gold coins. So, what you need is copper coins, smaller denomination coins for your everyday existence, and that happened in the post-Mauryan period. Have a look at some of the coins of the Indo-Parthians, the Bactrian Greeks and the Kushanas. Cast copper coins of the Shunga period were also found in a large quantity in this area. From monetization, we can move to urbanization, because these are all interlinked. An urban center would also have people with craft activities, then monetization will be a part of the urban process. So, the development in agriculture, proliferation of crafts and expansion of trade gave considerable fillip to the non-agrarian sector of the economy. The most prosperous phase of second urbanization in Indian history was during the period from 200 BC to 300 CE. You will be studying second urbanization of the Janapada period in another module. But here we find that in this period, particularly the post-Mauryan period, second urbanization reached its zenith. Important cities like Bactra, Pucolatis, that is Pushkalavati, Taxila, Madura, that is Mathura, which had already been in existence prior to the Kushana rule, blossomed further. In Ahichatra, which is near Bareilly, a concrete road was found from a layer assignable to about 200 CE. Mathura witnessed a remarkable growth first under the Indo-Scythians and later under the Kushanas. And we have references that how there was change in the economy of Mathura, and excavations show that we have houses with projections on stone to avoid traffic. So, the field archaeological data also suggests that there was strong urbanization in this period in Mathura. The ground plan at Sonk shows Sonk is an area which is just near Mathura and which has been excavated by the German archaeologist Herbert Hertel. Has done an excellent work in Sonk, and it shows the most developed and systematic phase of urban layout. Remains of residential houses made of mud and burned bricks of diverse sizes have been unearthed. Fortifications were revived, enlarged and repaired. Traceable ruins of fortifications indicate that Mathura of the Kushana age was fairly a large city. Mathura also emerged as a prosperous urban center in the Kushanas period, and Mathura's prosperity depended on trade, transit trade in particular, as it emerged as a nodal point where several important overland routes converged. Because the location, it was located in the Uttarapatha, and from Mathura one could easily go to Taxila, from Taxila one could easily go to regions of West Asia. So, therefore, it was evident that it would act as a nodal point. In this period, we also find that there is a continuation of the earlier cities and proliferation of the new ones. So, major cities in the middle Ganga plains like Shravasti, Kaushambi, Vaishali, Champa and Pataliputra not only continued but seemed to have attained their most prosperous phase. The proliferation of cities in this period has logically been seen as the secondary cities. The secondary urban formation was the result of close interactions between the Ganga valley and the periphery. And we have to keep in mind that secondary urbanization is different from second urbanization. Second urbanization, we had an epicenter in the middle Ganga valley. Now, with continuous interaction of the periphery with the regions of middle Ganga valley, a form of urban centers developed in this peripheral region, and these have been termed as secondary urbanization pattern. With this, we have certain port cities. Particularly, two port cities became very prominent in this region. One was Barbaricon, it was in the Indus Delta, and the other was Barugaza, which is known as Bharukacha, Bhrigukacha in the Indian literature and located in Gujarat. Periplus of the Erythraean Sea gives us a detailed description of the commodities or items of export and import into these regions. These two port cities had a very huge hinterland in places like Ujjaini and also in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. There was another port city in the east called Tomluk. If there are port cities, if there are urban centers, it is natural that there will be trade, there will be markets and there will be merchants. So, we have a huge category of merchants from this from the sources of this period. Various types are prominent in textual and inscriptional sources. So, these sources refer to Vanik, that is petty merchant, Sartavaha, itinerant merchant, Vyavahari, trader, Sreshti, rich trader and leader of a mercantile guild. And we have to be very particular that we cannot use merchant as a blanket term. The various terms used to designate different types of merchant so obviously indicate their difference in economic as well as social status. For example, a Sreshti was a big merchant. He had a significant place in the court, but therefore his status, social status was definitely different from the social status of a Vaidehaka who was a petty merchant. Some merchants were also very rich to give magnificent donations. So, we have Buddhist monastic sites, Buddhist stupa sites where the merchants have given donations, and so we know about the different categories of the merchants. Channels of communication is also very important, that is the routes of communication. How did people move from one place to another? How did we have long distance commercial transactions? The maritime routes, the silk routes, all these are very pertinent to understand the economy of the region, to understand the trade of a region. So, besides internal trade, the most significant aspect of commercial activities of this period is the brisk participation of India in long distance international exchange network, both overland and maritime, particularly with the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, Roman Empire had trade links with China and there was a great demand for Chinese silk in Roman market, which was supplied together with other items along the famous overland Silk Road. We shall have a look at the Silk Road and see that the route actually began from Luoyang in China and reached the two Mediterranean ports of Antioch and Alexandria by traversing through Central Asia, West Asia and Eurasia. So, in Dunhuang in China, the route began and then bifurcated into two channels because it reached the Taklamakan desert. Now, there was a route over the Taklamakan desert and below the Taklamakan desert. These two routes converged in a place called Kashgar, which was a very important center for traders. They used to come here and discuss, and it is a area of convergence. Then they moved into Afghanistan, went to the Kushan dominions and reached Parthia. After that, they reached, that is Iran, and they reached the famous marts of Seleucia and Palmyra, which were connected to the ports of Antioch and Alexandria. So, the length of the route of Silk Route was pretty from China to regions of West Asia. This route was known as Seidenstrasse because silk was one of the very important component which moved across this route. But silk was not only the only component, there were other things also which were a part of the movement of a part of the commodities that moved across the Silk Route. Now we have seen the overland Silk Route, and another very important factor that we have to remember, that with the rise of the Kushanas and the control of the Kushanas of Afghanistan region, the South Asia became a participant in the whole overland route from China to West Asia. But apart from that, another very interesting thing happened in this period, that is the knowledge of monsoon. And we have texts like Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, Pliny's Naturalis Historia and Strabo's Geographicon, which talks about better knowledge and utilization of the monsoon winds system, which greatly facilitated overseas contacts with India, especially its west coast through the Red Sea channel. So, a ship sailing from the Red Sea port of Berenike or Meos Hormuz or Leukos Limen could reach the western seaboard of India in less than 40 days, if not in 20 days. So, this naturally facilitated an alternative and faster communication between India and the eastern Mediterranean areas. And in this route, we have also another island called Socotra, which was also an halting station. So, Socotra Island allowed people to stay there, and for a long journey it acted as a very important halting station, and recently many inscriptions have been found from Socotra, and this has been studied by Ingo Strauss, which talks about the presence of people from Barugaza, from Hatab in this region. Now, when we have trade routes, we have to have commodities also. What are the commodities that were plying across the Indian Ocean, that were plying across the Arabian Sea? So, the major commodities that we find from our sources, both archaeological and textual, is that we have pepper. Pepper from Malabar was a very important item of export to countries of Eastern Roman Empire. Precious stones, nards, fabrics, that is cloths. We have different kinds of cloths, and it is very interesting when you look at the things that were imported or exported, like it is written in the Periplus, cotton cloths of good quantity, printed cotton. So, you have different kinds of varieties. So, cotton, very good quality silk, kind of muslin. So, these were the different kinds of fabric that were exported from the Indian subcontinent to other places. As I mentioned, that pepper was a very important commodity, and it was known as black gold. Indian texts talked about pepper as Yavana Priya. Yavana denoted originally the Greeks, the Indo-Greeks, and later on the Greco-Romans, and finally any foreigners. So, the Romans actually loved peppers in their medicines, in their foods, and so there was great demand. Among the stones that are explicitly marked as Indian are the diamond, emerald, turquoise, onyx, and some others. Spikenard is another important item, and it is same as the nard. The word nard is derived from Greek nardos, referring to oils extracted from certain fragrant grasses grown in the Himalayan mountainous region of India. We have reference to a loan contract document which talks about Gangetic nard. So, Gangetic nard was also an item which was exported from the port of Muziris to countries of Eastern Mediterranean. India was also a very important source of cotton. As I mentioned earlier, that fabric, that talks about different fabric, and particularly the Western Deccan region, which was an important source for cotton textiles. Periplus, while speaking of the goods brought to the port of Barugaza from its hinterland, talks about Indian garments of cotton and a considerable amount of cloth of ordinary quality. From this, talking about merchants, traders, commodities, routes, we find that in the post-modern period there was a kind of an organization of the merchant groups, and these were actually guild-like organizations which were given names like Sreni, Puga, Shangha, and the guilds flourished right from the 6th century BC, but particularly in the post-Mauryan period, we find that they had different functions. For example, in some cases the guilds were acting as banks. So, the people were keeping money with the guilds, and when they had to go for trade long distance trade, for example, the Sarthavahas, that is the caravan merchants, they could borrow money from the guild and then go for their own purpose. The existence of guild of traders in Mathura is suggested by a well-known epigraph of the year 28 of the Kanishka era. And as I mentioned, that the activities of the guilds were varied. So, in some cases the guilds accepted permanent deposits of money, like which is called Akshaya Nivi, for perpetuity, on condition that the principal would be kept intact and only the interest would be utilized. So, this ensured supply of capital to expanding craft activities and traders. So, there were different guilds, guilds of craftsmen, guilds of traders, and different occupational guilds. For example, the Vardhakis could have their own guild, the Malakaras could have their own guilds, and the cohesive spirit of the guild could be seen in this period, which later on gradually started breaking up in the early medieval period. Now, for a burgeoning economy, it is important that, and when we have proliferation of crafts and industries, we have to have revenue generation. So, enough revenue should be collected to fill the exchequer of the monarchs, and by imposing different forms of levies on traders, industries and crafts. Here comes in the Junagadh inscription of Rudradaman, datable to 150 CE, where we find that he categorically talks about his treasury, which was overflowed with an accumulation of gold, silver, diamonds, beryl stones and other precious things. These were rightfully obtained through collection of taxes like Boli, that is a kind of tribute from the subjects, Shulka, that is ferry dues, tolls, duties on merchandise, and Bhaga. Bhaga is the royal share, generally 1/6 of the produce. So, these are the taxes which are normal and righteously being taken by the ruler. Then he goes on that the story behind Rudradaman's is that he did a repairment of an embankment, and large amount of wealth was needed for this, and he said that he spent the money for this from his own treasury. The term used in the inscription is Swasmat Kosha, and he did not impose Vishti, Kara and Pranaya. Vishti is forced labor, that is we call begar, that you are asked to work and then you are not being paid. Kara is a kind of a tax which were there, and then we have Pranaya, which were extra tax. Apart from this, we have also instances in the Kushan period from Begram, where collection in kind is also being talked about. So, excavations at Begram in eastern Afghanistan have brought to light a storehouse of the Kushana period comprising wares from different countries. Wheeler has suggested that this storehouse was probably a customs depot for receipt of dues in kind collected from traders participating in international trade. So, whoever has to cross Begram region, they were from the South Asia going to West Asia, they had to put something as a customs duty or a toll in that place. So, this whole thing was unearthed, beautiful glasses, beautiful ivories which could be used as a form of tax in kind. So, Begram was very much within the Kushan Empire, and so we can understand that in how the Kushan officials also collected taxes in kind. Therefore, when we look at the different activities of the post-Mauryan period, we find that we can say in a nutshell that the post-Mauryan period in North India experienced flourishing economy. The rulers were oriented towards trade, particularly the Kushanas were very much in favor of trade. So, there were burgeoning trade contacts with countries beyond India and also within territories of India. The hinterlands, rich hinterlands were linked with the ports, there were good roads, and since they were under one common political authority, it was much safer and there was no problem for the Sartavahas to take their commodities, their merchandise from one place to another. There were continuity in the presence of new urban centers, and so from the time of the Janapadas we find that proliferation of urban centers was a feature of this period. Port towns were there, as I mentioned earlier, very flourishing port towns, and sometimes what we notice is that with the rise of one port town, the other port town declines. So, this also happened here, like when Barbaricon was at its zenith, Barugaza was perhaps there, but we do not know much about it, but we find that Barugaza flourished very much, and Periplus gives us the details of Barugaza, and gradually Barbaricon declined with, and this rise of a port is also linked with the state, interest of the state. The Kushanas were more interested now towards the interior part of the Indian subcontinent, and so the rich hinterlands of Barugaza helped it to flourish. Long distance trade networks were very much a part of the post-Mauryan scenario. So, we have on the one hand trade with China, the silk trade, then we had trade with countries of the Eastern Mediterranean, and we must say that there were like the circuitous trade routes were also went to Sri Lanka. So, post-Mauryan period experienced different kinds of long distance trade networks. Emphatic evidence of burgeoning trades comes from coinage, and this period saw immense monetization. Almost all the dynasties were issuing coins from with a variety, various devices and with other denominations. So, revenue terms in the inscriptions also could be seen, and from those revenue terms we can understand or have an idea of the pattern of taxation in this period. Thus, in fine, we can say that post-Mauryan period witnessed a thriving economy, and the sources give us ample evidence to suggest that.